So welcome again. Today we are grateful to welcome Neal Lichter, who is with Pathfinders for Autism. He joined Pathfinders for Autism in October of 2013. He is responsible for the daily intake of questions and concerns from parents, caregivers, educators, professionals, and individuals with autism spectrum disorder. As a trainer, Neal has provided an understanding of ASD training since 2014. His audiences include students from kindergarten through college, educators, police, first responders, medical personnel, and many others across the state of Maryland. Neal is also responsible for helping to plan many of the workshops that Pathfinders for Autism collaborates on around Maryland, including our conference. Pathfinders is one of our colleagues that co-sponsors with us. Neal is married with 2 sons, one of which has autism. And so, Neal, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much to Marcy and Beth and Yvette. You guys have always been great partners to Pathfinders for Autism. I'm really looking forward to the day when we can get back to doing these live and in person, but I'm pleased to be able to come out and talk to everybody today with just a basic sort of understanding Autism 101, who is Pathfinders for Autism, and some other things like that. So a little bit of housekeeping about who Pathfinders for Autism is. We are a Maryland nonprofit, Maryland only, not part of a national organization, local group. All the money we raise stays right in the state of Maryland. We've been around for 21 years, started by a group of families who are looking to gather resources and information and share them with each other so they could find resources and providers and information to help their loved ones who are on the autism spectrum. It's grown over the last 21 years. We are based in Baltimore County, but we do cover the entire state of Maryland. And we do 3 main things. Still, the resource center is the main crux of what we do. Our website, pathfindersforautism.org, is fantastic. It's got a lot of information, resources, articles on it. It's also got a great provider directory. So if families or individuals or professionals are looking for resources, if they're looking for a barber or a dentist, a speech therapist, a financial planner, anything along the lines of needed to help their loved ones or themselves who are on the autism spectrum, you can go onto our provider directory on our website, click off one of any 100 and some different categories, and search by zip code to find resources close to where you live. You can always reach out to us, call in on our helpline, which is 443-330-5341. And you can get in touch with one of us here. I think out of the 6 or 7 of us that work here, most of us have children or relatives, siblings on the autism spectrum. I'm trying to put our number into the chat while I talk, which is a very difficult thing for someone who doesn't multitask well to do, but there you go. That's our helpline. And you can always reach out to us. So that resource center is still a very big part of what we do. We do workshops and trainings all over the state of Maryland. And Marcy said we do a lot of first responder, police, fire, EMS, hospitals on understanding autism and disability. We'll go to anybody who brings us in though, any kind of school system to talk to kids or to talk to teachers. I talk to summer camp counselors, lifeguards, horseback riding instructors, rock climbing instructors, parents, anybody who wants a basic understanding of autism, autism spectrum disorder. We do all of that. We also put on a number of workshops and webinars for families around the state, whether it's potty training, picky eating, financial planning, transitioning, social skills, relationships, things like that. Those are all free workshops that we put on. You can also go on our website and find the recorded webinars that we've done. We've done some great safety workshops, when they wander and run away, how to interact with police, things like that. So families and individuals on the autism spectrum and professionals can have a chance to watch those. And we also do free family fun events all around the state. So we want to remove the financial burden to come out for families and do things together and have a good time. So we'll rent out the aquarium, we rent out the science center, we take over big sections at baseball games and give away free tickets for families who can come out. You can find all that information on our website or follow us on social media. We're all over Facebook and Instagram. and share all of our family fun events there. So that's all the housekeeping I have to do for Pathfinders for Autism. I might promote the website a little bit more later on when we talk about our safety stuff, but we can jump into our presentation now as soon as my remote works. There we go. So why should you care? Why do we do these presentations? I've been this week, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I have been all over the state of Maryland doing these workshops for police. Frederick County In-Service, Anne Arundel County Police Academy, Baltimore Police Academy, Hagerstown Community College, all kinds of trainings going all over the state of Maryland to work with police and understanding. And the reason is because of the most recent prevalence statistics. The numbers for autism prevalence are going in the wrong direction. 1 in 44 children is now identified with an autism spectrum disorder nationwide, and 1 in 27 boys. 1 in 114 girls nationally. Here in Maryland, we are at 1 in 49 children from 1 in 50. We're at 1 in 30 boys from 1 in 33. And we're at 1 in 133 girls, which I believe was at 1 in 135. It is about 4.5 times more likely, more commonly diagnosed in boys than it is in girls. But there's no real reason given.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're not seeing your screen if you're sharing something.
Oh, what do you mean? You don't see my PowerPoint?
Nope.
I wonder what happened. Oh, it says share sound share. How about now?
Now you're good.
Now I'm good. Well, that was weird. Couldn't see my PowerPoint. I wonder what happened. Okay, whatever. But that's why we keep rolling on. We love Zoom presentations. So those are the most recent prevalence statistics now that you can see them on my slide. 4 times more commonly diagnosed in boys than it is in girls. Important thing to remember about this study that was done by the Centers for Disease Control is this was done on 8-year-old children in a variety of different school systems across the state of Maryland. So it really doesn't consider the little ones or the older ones or adults. The numbers could be dramatically different if we consider that entire population. But this is one particular snapshot for 8-year-old children who are in public schools or non-public schools who have an autism diagnosis on their IEP. The most recent statistics from the Maryland State Department of Education say over 13,000 kids in the Maryland State Department school systems with autism as a diagnosis on their IEP. So it's like I tell police and everybody else, it's not a matter of if you're going to have interactions with people on the autism spectrum. It really is a matter of when. So there we go. That's why you should care. This is why I care. This is one of the main reasons I care and why I go out and I do as much as I do and try and do as many trainings as I can. That's my son. That's Max. He's the one in the black t-shirt. His autism impacts him through language, anxiety, communication, behavior. He has a tough time sometimes with dealing with the world and his frustrations and managing his anxiety. So I need things to be a little bit easier for him. I need people to understand some of the behaviors that they see. And I need him to work on managing and maintaining and adjusting to the world and how he manages his anxiety as he goes forward. So I think it's important for everyone to have just a little bit of more awareness, acceptance, and understanding so that Max can have an easier time, and a lot of other kids as well maybe have an easier time going out into the world. I'm not a clinical presenter. I don't have any letters after my last name. This is as clinical as I get. It's a neurological development disorder affecting multiple areas of the brain and body, which is a really, really fancy way to tell you that it's not cookie cutter. Not everybody on the autism spectrum looks alike, acts alike, sounds alike, is triggered by the same things, de-escalates the same way. Some people with autism, it's a visible disability, and other people with autism, you can't tell at all. Until, like for Max's example, you wouldn't know unless you started talking to him that he had any kind of autism spectrum disorder. The way he communicates would give it away, but visually you can't tell just by looking at him. And everybody with autism is so unique and so individualized that the phrase, that the expression that everybody uses is, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. The autism my son deals with is very different than my coworker Trisha's son deals with, different than my coworker Shelly's son, or any of the other people that work in our office who have kids on the autism spectrum. You won't find 4 more different kids impacted in different ways, all with the same exact diagnosis. Early intervention has proven to be extremely successful and extremely beneficial in helping individuals learn to accommodate, learn to deal with, learn to adjust to the way their autism impacts them. A number of different therapies up on the screen there. Things like medication is on there because people use medications off-label. They use labeled medications, but they use them for different purposes. The best example I can give you would be clonidine, which is a medicine that's commonly used for blood pressure, but is also a sleep aid for individuals who struggle with sleep disorders and difficulty sleeping, which is very common among the autism population. Clonidine is that one step above melatonin that when you have kids who struggle with sleep. Biomedical, homeopathic, special diets, all of those show sometimes positive results for people when they use them. But I don't know that it uses that those diets help with the autism or may help manage some behaviors that are exhibited because of maybe pain or discomfort. An example would be a gluten-free diet. If my child has a gluten allergy and the gluten that I'm feeding him is aggravating his stomach and creating pain, pain can create anxiety, which creates behavior. And the behavior is what gets noticed. If I take the gluten out of the diet, the behavior will probably go away. But for my son who doesn't have a gluten allergy, removing gluten out of his diet is not going to make his behavior go away at all. In fact, it might increase it because that means there's not a lot of pizza coming his way, which is his favorite thing in the world. So really it does what works for some people. I always tell people, listen, if that works for you and that helps your child, you go ahead and go for it, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be effective for every single person because autism is so unique and individualized. There are some individuals with autism that are going to need services and supports their whole life. And there are others that are going to sail right through school, maybe get to college, get jobs, but really struggle with understanding social interaction, struggle with sensory processing disorder, struggle with a number of different parts of their autism that all create anxiety. Anxiety creates behavior. I'm going to say that a lot today, I promise. This is sort of an old model of what the autism spectrum used to look like. Terms like Asperger's syndrome, pervasive development disorder, not otherwise specified, are no longer diagnoses under the DSM-5. But I still use terminology like this because there are people of a certain age group where Asperger's syndrome is still their diagnosis. That's on their IEP, that's on their medical records, that follows them. So I still use the terminology. Typically, Asperger's would be a milder form of autism spectrum disorder, oftentimes associated with normal to high IQ. And those individuals may not need as many visual daily supports as some other individuals, but it doesn't mean that their autism doesn't impact them in other ways where they may struggle and have difficulties. For example, sensory processing, social interaction, things like that, which create their own brand of anxiety, which anxiety leads to behavior. I told you I'm going to say it a lot. I have a coworker who has a child diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and he's a very bright young man. And when I met him, he was 8 years old, and he was telling me he was working on inventing bone regeneration when he was 8. And I was just like, you're 8. And I was watching Speed Racer cartoons when I was 8 years old, and you're talking about bone regeneration, and it just blew me away. And he's 17 now. He wants to go to MIT. He told me he wants to study quantum physics. He wants to make computer animated movies like Tim Burton, and he's got the brain for it. He really does, but he struggles so much socially, knowing how to fit into a conversation, knowing how to see the consequences of actions, knowing how to hear the other side of an argument, see the other side of a coin, listen to somebody else's opinion. It's very one-sided when it comes to dealing with this young man. He struggles a lot with authority. Why do I have to do a report on a president? I think they're boring. I'm going to do my report on Steve Jobs and turn it in, and gets a failing grade. And then there becomes a whole lot of behavior surrounding the fact that he didn't pass his exam, and he argues with his teachers. His day is divided up in his school between achieving academically and achieving behaviorally. And as long as he achieves the 10 out of 10 marks he gets, he's allowed extended time on his computer animation software, which is a very preferred activity for him. But he had a Tuesday morning about a month ago that was just horrendous. Really rough behaviors in the morning that had basically ruined his chance for getting his devices at the end of the day. That was an unacceptable consequence to him. He didn't want them to call mom and let her know that he wasn't earning that computer animation software that he covets so much. So what he did was he went to his laptop at school. He hacked the school's communication and phone system, and he shut down the entire communication and email system for the school at the time because he didn't want them to call his mom. He didn't want them to let mom know that he hadn't earned his reward. Doesn't see the consequence of that action, never considers the consequence of that action. They had mom's cell phone number. They had cell phones. He got caught. He did get in trouble. But there's part of that impulsivity that goes with autism spectrum disorder. That's part of that disability is impulsivity. And impulsivity leads to elopement, leads to poor decision-making, saying things you probably shouldn't say when you shouldn't say it, taking risks you shouldn't take because you don't envision consequences, climbing up to high places, things like that that can oftentimes lead to injuries, tragedies, things like that, unfortunately. At the other end of the spectrum was sort of what I pictured when I heard that my son was diagnosed with autism. Somebody who would need more visual daily supports, getting up, getting dressed, feeding, toileting, school, things like that. Max needs some support in those areas, but he is very verbal. But I pictured a person with noise canceling headphones, rocking, flapping, low verbal, maybe vocalizing. And that isn't where Max is. Max is somewhere in the middle there. But I do have a coworker who has a son. His name is Eric. He's a 26-year-old man. And that is Eric, low verbal, nonverbal, very little eye contact, very little vocal contact, a lot of singing, vocalizing over and over again. And I bring Eric with me when I go and train police or go and train at the hospitals. And I bring the top doc or the top nurse up to the front of the room and I say to them, your next patient has autism, please get me a name and a telephone number. And I bring Eric into the room and Eric comes in and he stands at the front of the room and the doctor or the nurse or the police officer who we have as a volunteer, if I'm training police that day, will stand in front of Eric and just ask him verbally, what's your name? What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? Hey buddy, what's your name? And Eric doesn't answer questions verbally at all. And eventually the doctor or somebody will end up getting to, it's almost like a baby voice where he's saying, hey buddy, what's your name? Hey, what's your name? And Eric at that point, who's 26, and the doctor is now talking to him like a 5-year-old, gives the doctor a very dirty, disgusted look and walks away. You can't talk to Eric like he's a child. Eric is a grown man. Eventually someone will say, well, can he read? Can he write? And the doctor's, well, I don't know. And so you get a piece of paper and a pencil and you write down, what's your name? And you hand it to Eric. And Eric writes back, my name is Eric. What's your name? Eric doesn't communicate verbally. And it's important that people understand that there's more than one way to communicate information, that you shouldn't judge the book by its cover. Don't look at the way, the amount of support somebody needs. Don't look at the way as much as somebody is impacted and make judgments based on intellect. Eric studies foreign languages. Eric takes all of his favorite movies and puts them through internet translators to hear them in other foreign languages that aren't already on the DVD. The other day, his mom told me he was feeding lines from Princess Bride into a computer internet translator so he could hear that movie, his favorite movie, in Ukrainian. I guess he's watching the news. He hears the news. He hears a lot about Ukraine. He wants to hear what the language sounds like, so he's interested in it and he's researching it. Now, we're not having conversations in any of those languages. We don't have conversations verbally, but clearly there's a 26-year-old brain in there taking in knowledge, interest, passions, and things like that. And it's just finding an effective way to be able to communicate with him to get information out. A young lady on the autism spectrum said, listen, if you put me as a dot on a line, everyone's going to think that I don't struggle with my autism, that because I'm on the higher end of the spectrum, which is what the terminology used to be, that I don't need as many supports, that I don't struggle. And she said, it's simply not true. She likes this way of diagramming. And I have to agree with her. When I'm interviewing individuals or or talking to individuals, autistic individuals who come into our office to volunteer or to work, I try and gauge where their strengths are, where they might need more support in a variety of different areas and the way their autism impacts them. So I can find a good fit for a job, something they'd be interested in, something they'd be passionate about, something they'd be effective at. The closer in on this spectrum diagram to the middle, the more impacted somebody is. This is actually a chart for a young man who works in my office, who's pretty low verbal, with some pretty rough motor skills, horrible handwriting, can't tie shoes, can't open bottles, struggles with his motor skills. But his executive function, his ability to file, collate, do data entry is off the charts. And when I had him come in and we were talking to him and we figured out that he was great on a computer, it's an easier way to train and work with him. I have no desire to do data entry. I find it extremely boring. I like going out and doing trainings. I don't like coming back in and typing in information for hours and hours. I'm not good at it. I get bored with it. This young man, I can bring him piles of work. We simplify directions and write it down in some basic language. We role play it, role model it back and forth with each other so we understand how to do it, and then off he goes. And Quinn is just a huge part of our office, and he's a great part of our team, and he lets us be out on the road because he can handle all of the data entry we throw at him. And we actually have 2 data entry guys now who come into our office once a week to do data entry work for us, and we're actually partnering with the Howard County Autism Society's adult hiring program to hire one of their adults from their program to do a lot of our database management, updating our provider directory. We have a lot of positions now that we're trying to fill with adults on the autism spectrum to help us make our website better, make our provider directory more accurate, et cetera, et cetera. So I've already said it a lot, but I think it's one of the most important things that I learned upon becoming an autism parent, and it didn't hit me right away. It was something that I sort of had to figure out. When anxiety goes up, language processing, thought processing, and communication processing all go down. So when someone's anxiety starts to build, their ability to communicate and think clearly and effectively is going to decline. And when all of that starts to go away, when that ability to communicate and think, process thought, and you have that anxiety is when you see behavior come out. I think the yellow arrow and the black arrow together are pretty normal. I think everybody feels that way. When your anxiety goes up, maybe you see behaviors go up. I live in Owings Mills in Baltimore County. I work in Hunt Valley in Baltimore County. I don't ever have to go on the Beltway to go to work. I drive through beautiful rolling green horse country the whole way. And it's a lovely drive. And the only time there's ever traffic is if one of the farmers decides they're going to pull their John Deere tractor out onto the 2-lane road, one each way, and move it on up the road to the next farm. And I left my house. My wife had a presentation that she was doing. She was finishing at 5:15. I said, honey, I got to leave by 5:20. I got to get there so I can get set up. I left my house. I was like, okay, I got time. And I get here and I'm on my way and traffic's moving great. And as soon as I turn onto the road, there's Farmer John and his John Deere trucking along at 15 miles an hour. And there's no way to pass on this road because I can't see around the tractor. And if you'd have been in my car, you'd have seen anxiety start to build. I'm gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Maybe a little sweat breaks out across my forehead as I start to get nervous that I'm going to be late. For me, being late is really an unacceptable thing. I hate being late. I don't want to make people feel like their time isn't valuable to me. So to me, if I'm not 10 minutes early, I'm late. And I know how Zoom is and I know how technology is. I want to get there early and get set up. If you'd have been in my car on the way here, you definitely would have seen behavior come out. As I may have let the farmer know what I thought about his driving style. I may have let him know what number I thought he was. That behavior comes out. But you know what? I can process the anxiety that I deal with. I know that I can reach out to Marcy or Yvette or Beth and say, listen, I'm 5 minutes late. I know I have coworkers who are on the call on the meeting tonight who I could have messaged to say, please let them know I'll be there shortly. I'm stuck in traffic. I even brought up Waze and put it into my Waze, and even Waze was saying, relax, you're 15 minutes early still, even though you left that early. So it helped me deal with the anxiety I was feeling. But if you take away that red arrow, that ability to process, and that processing drops, Anxiety goes to behavior very, very quickly, and it can come out in a variety of different ways. Major areas of impact where individuals are impacted by their autism spectrum disorder: communication, sensory processing, social interaction, and behavior. And that's how we divide up our presentation today going forward. So one of the first exercises I have as part of my program is, there's only two people that have cameras on right now, and that would be Yvette and Marcy. So I have to ask only Yvette and Marcy because the other people weren't on camera. But how come neither one of you put your right hand in the air? Did you all see on my slide where it said, raise your right hand in the air? There, oh, there's Yvette, looks very surprised. But I have a feeling Marcy saw it because she had a look on her face. But you know what? Nobody ever puts their right hand in the air. The point of that slide is that you're, as a parent, as a teacher, in a professional setting, you're going to be giving requests, orders, demands, and you expect them to be followed quickly and efficiently, even if you think you're communicating them effectively. But not everybody communicates and processes language the same way. I thought I gave a pretty reasonable request. I thought I effectively communicated it by putting it as a bullet point on my slide, but nobody did it. Nobody ever does it. And what I say to police when I did this today, and I had a class of 61 police officers in academy today, and not one of them put their hand in the air. And I said to them, well, all of you are non-compliant. I gave you an order, a direction, a request, and nobody complied with it because nobody really picked up on what I was communicating. But people communicate differently. People process information differently at different rates and in different ways. So keep that in mind when you're communicating. Not everyone communicates the exact same way. If you've ever had a chance to read the book or watch the documentary that's out now called The Reason I Jump, I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it or read it. The Reason I Jump is a book written by a young Japanese teenager with autism who's nonverbal, who communicates everything electronically, typing it out, who's very self-aware of his autism and understands it very well. And they asked him, why does it take you so long to answer a question? And the way he described it was that all of the thoughts in his head float around like dots in space. And he can't organize his thoughts in any other way. So when you ask him a question, he has to look at each individual thought and try and find the answer that you're looking for. And sometimes answers come out that don't make sense, that are out of place, that don't answer the question you're looking for. But that's the way his thought process is. And my son's very similar, where I could say to Max, hey, Max, what do you want for dinner tonight? And I start to get a variety of answers that have absolutely nothing to do with the questions I'm asking him. Yeah, Max, I know you like Legos, but that's not what I know. Last Tuesday, we had pizza for dinner, but what do you want for dinner tonight, Max? I know you're a student. You're talking, yes, we're going to go to the zoo some point soon. I really need to know what you want for dinner. Can you just answer? And finally, we get an I want pizza, which is always the answer when I ask him what he wants for dinner. But sometimes it might take a few minutes. Sometimes it might take 30 seconds to a minute for him to go through all those answers in his head to try and find the right one, and stuff comes out that doesn't make any sense and doesn't really apply to the question. And if I keep firing questions at him, come on, you're not, hurry up, I need your answer. Why is it taking you so long? It's harder for him to process the language that he's using and to give me the answer that he wants to give me. And that leads a lot into communication, language processing, thought processing, which we're going to talk about. There's a couple more answers there. So communication is a big piece of what I talk about. I think communication is so vital in understanding the way people communicate and trying to be flexible in the way you communicate to find what works best for the autistic individual that you're dealing with in your life, whether it's a student or a child or somebody else. People are verbal and nonverbal, communicate verbally and nonverbally. 30 to 40% of the autism population is considered low verbal to nonverbal. There may be individuals who are verbal, but unable to sustain a conversation. Having a conversation is sort of a social skill and an art form. The talking and then listening, the not just waiting to talk, but listening to what somebody says. The back and forth can be a struggle. And some people aren't aware of how to do it. And when anxiety goes up, they really struggle to remember. So you may get people who just give you verbal dumps of information instead of having a back and forth conversation. when you're speaking with them. My son uses scripts to communicate. My son loves having conversations, hates having to think of original things to say, so relies on words that are comforting to him. And he memorizes his favorite movies, videos, YouTube channels, whatever, and uses the words he finds in those movies and videos to be able to communicate. So he doesn't have to think of something to say. My computer is telling me it's going to restart, so I had to put that on delay. That'll pop up again sometime soon. That scared me. So he uses scripts to communicate. So I'll see him talking to people, and they'll talk to him for a few minutes, and they'll say to me, "Oh, he's so bright. We had a lovely conversation." And I said, "Yeah, but everything he said was right out of Toy Story 2. And unless you know Toy Story 2 the way he does, you'd never recognize the language because he's able to make it fit. But if you ask him a question that doesn't fit into one of his scripts, he's just going to turn around and walk away from you. The anxiety of having to try and think of answers and things to say will create the behavior that is walking away, because when his anxiety goes up, his behavior is to escape away from the thing that creates his anxiety. So the best he does, I think he's brilliant. He's found a way to communicate and stay in a conversation while not having to think of original things to say, because he wants that social piece, but once it gets to be too much of a struggle, he walks away. If he really wants to talk to you, he'll say, "Here's your next line," and he'll tell you what to say so that you can keep the conversation going. But it is a struggle for him. Some people use echolalia, the repetition back of the last thing you hear. It's a form of delaying response. It gives somebody a little bit more time to respond to the question you ask. It's a sort of a form of scripting by just taking something you've already heard and repeating it instead of having to think of something else to say. And you may hear that. It's not being done to aggravate or irritate. It's not the game you played to drive your little brother or sister crazy if you're an older brother, or you played it on an older brother or sister to drive them crazy. It's not being done for that reason. It is a form of delaying response for communication. A lot of people do use that who are on the autism spectrum. You may find repetitive language, idiosyncratic language. Technology has been an amazing tool for helping people who struggle getting their thoughts into words, into communications, whether it's on a text device, on a tablet, whether it's sign language, whether it's pet cards or anything like that. Pet cards. For anybody who's been teaching for a long time, it used to be a program called Boardmaker, but now you Google pet cards for a lot of different things, and you can find them on Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers or some of those sites, and very effective for helping somebody who might be struggling to communicate, to identify what they might need or what they might want as a way of communicating. Certainly an older method, families used to carry them on notebooks, Velcroed to notebooks, and people would put sentences together using them, but it is still used by some people on the autism spectrum. Use direct language. Don't say in 10 words what you could say in 5 words. Keep your language easy to understand. Keep it difficult to misinterpret. Misinterpretations lead to miscommunications, lead to negative interactions. So keep your language simple and easy to understand. If you're getting answers back to questions that don't seem to fit the question you're asking, think if there's a way that that question could have been misinterpreted to get the answer that you're looking for. I said to Max today, "Hey Max, I got to go back up to my office. I'm doing a presentation to my friends down in Prince George's County. How's my hair look?" And he looked at me and he went, "Daddy, you don't have hair." Now, it's a rude thing to say. He's not wrong, but he hears me joke about myself that way all the time. So where a little white lie might be appropriate there, my son is a very good rule follower and a literal thinker. And my son was not going to lie to me. His thought process is, you asked me the question, you must want the answer. And I'm going to give you the honest answer. My coworker Shelley always said, don't ask a person with autism if you look fat in a dress, unless you are fully prepared for an honest answer. So keep your language easy to understand, keep it hard to misinterpret. Get rid of things like sarcasm, metaphors, euphemisms, idioms. All of those are hard to interpret, hard to understand, especially for our literal thinkers. I mean, sarcasm is saying the opposite of what you mean and hoping the other person can interpret it by the tone of your voice and the look on your face. And all of that is very difficult for people to interpret and understand. So I'll give you an example of one that can be very confusing. If you want to unmic, you want to put it in the chat. What did we tell this young man? Anybody? Feel free. Anybody have a guess?
Put the chair down.
Nope, didn't tell him to put the chair down. I asked him to take a seat. Right? I see everybody go, oh, yeah, right, I get it. Okay. It's not what I meant for him to do, though, right? That's not what take a seat means. But I promise you, my 17-year-old would do the exact same thing. And he would never look at me and say, Daddy, I don't understand what that means. Could you clarify what you mean by that expression? Because Max knows what take means. Max, if I said to Max, take my phone upstairs, he's not going to sit on my phone. I'm going to take it. Where do you want me to take it, Dad? I've got it. Where should I take it? What's an easier way to tell him what I want him to do in that picture? What would you say to him? Go ahead, Marcy. You gave me the first answer. You want to give me the right one?
Sit down in the chair.
Sit down in the blue chair. You've removed any chance for misinterpretation there. I don't want my son to do that in a classroom and have a teacher think he's being a smart aleck. I don't want my son to do that in front of a police officer and have a police officer think he's being silly or difficult or funny and get the wrong impression. If you remove that confusing language, you can facilitate more communication and remove the chances for misinterpretation and miscommunication. I think it's such an important thing to try and do, or think of the words you use and if they make sense to everybody. And if you can think of an example where an expression isn't going to make sense to everybody, get rid of it and simplify your language, make it easier to understand. It takes longer for people on the autism spectrum to process language, sometimes up to 20 seconds to come up with an answer. I'm not being rude. I'm getting my stopwatch up on my phone because 20 seconds doesn't seem like a very long time. So let's sit here for 20 seconds. That's 10. That's 20 seconds. And that's to answer one question. And if you ask the question again, the clock starts over. And if you ask another question, the clock starts over again, and you haven't gotten the answer to your first question, anxiety is going to start to build. When anxiety starts to build, the ability to communicate and process language and thought is going to go down. And it's actually going to be harder for somebody to give you an answer. So give people time to think, give people time to process, give people time to ask questions, give someone time to say, can you repeat that? I don't understand what that means. It's a big deal. It's a big difference maker. It really did make a big difference for me and Max. He used to get in the car with me after school, and I would say, Max, how was school? How was history? How was science? Did you play soccer? Did you eat lunch with that girl you liked at lunchtime? And all these, and he would get so annoyed with me from the back of the car, start scripting and yelling and using language that's not acceptable. And then one day I just slowed it down and I was like, Max, how was school? And I sat there and I waited. And it seems like such a long time, but at like 16 or 17 seconds, he was like, school was great. How was work? And I was blown away. I didn't even know he'd never asked me how work was. And I said, work was great. How was history? And I waited. And his pocket's like that 16, 17 area. And he's like, history's boring, but I really like science. Apologies if there's any history teachers on tonight, but I really like science. And I was blown away. No, it's not like a Hallmark movie and the autism goes away and we all go skipping across the rainbow. I mean, we still have our struggles with autism. But my son and I had 4 or 5 back and forth exchanges with no anxiety, no yelling, no screaming, no cursing, more patience for both of us. And it was a really effective way to communicate. Give it a try, see if it works. Slowing things down, giving someone time to think and process can be a big difference maker in the way you communicate. Talk a little bit about sensory processing. Sensory processing is another one of those areas of impact that creates anxiety, which leads to behavior. It's your brain's ability to process all of the things, all of the input it gets from your senses while you're doing your daily life. When it becomes sensory processing disorder is when it interferes with your daily life, your inability to process. I could sit here in my office in Hunt Valley, stare into my little camera to talk to you. And while I'm doing that, I'm sitting in an office with very bright fluorescent lights over my head. that buzz in an irritating way, and it's really annoying. There's a light blinking out in the hallway that keeps going on and off. That's distracting me. I have a fan running next to me. I can hear that fan running next to me. I'm a diabetic. I wear an insulin pump, and the pump that's in my pocket is vibrating every few minutes because I either need to calibrate it or change the battery or do something to it. And my brain is taking in all of this sensory input while I'm trying to communicate with you, and hopefully I can keep communicating effectively while my brain processes all the input coming from the senses. But the reality is there are some people out there who with autism spectrum disorder and other disabilities who struggle with their sensory processing, where noises and sounds and sights and smells can be overwhelming and intense and lead to breakdown, meltdown, major behavioral problems as he tries to escape, as people try to escape away from the noise. Kids were eloping out of classrooms that had fluorescent light bulbs. And what they found was when they turned the fluorescent lights off and used natural light or lamps, the amount of kids eloping out of classrooms went down. So you do see a lot of special needs classes without fluorescent light bulbs in them in some school systems. That's what we just talked about. Sensitivity to sound and light leads to overstimulation. People can be understimulated, giving themselves a little sensory input, clapping, patting themselves, things like that. Proprioception, body awareness is one of the senses people do struggle with in sensory processing, knowing where you fit into a space, knowing how your body fits into a new area. Max walking into places will pause briefly at a doorway and just get an idea of his bearings before he walks into a room. The balance, the vestibular system is impacted by autism, and people sometimes do struggle with that. There's a young man in my office who has what can best be described as a drunk walk, struggles so much with his balance as he walks, he stumbles a little bit. Could certainly be interpreted as somebody who's inebriated if you don't know who he is and how his autism impacts him as he walks down the road or walks down the street. I don't want it to be misinterpreted that way and someone come up to him to try and interact with him, a police officer trying to find out if he's drunk or something like that. It's just the way he walks. It's the way his balance system is impacted by his autism. Quick video of what it might be like for someone on the autism spectrum to do something as simple as walking through the mall. Make sure I've got volume.
Six, 7, 8, 9.
Take my hand.
No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it? I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
So imagine that's your everyday. Imagine those sights, those sounds, those smells can all become way too intense and too loud and too scary. That creates anxiety, that creates pain, that creates anxiety and panic, and that leads to behavior. And it certainly can happen in places like that. I've had my son clearing shelves in the grocery store when he was little because things were too loud and too intense in the store, and it got too overwhelming for my child. So it's certainly something that could happen. And where can you have the opportunity to reduce sensory input, whether it's earplugs, noise canceling headphones, sunglasses, having fidget items to help de-escalate things that they can hold or fidget with to try and draw attention away, clothing that can be more comfortable. Just picture that irritating tag in the back of your shirt is very annoying. But for someone who struggles with sensory processing disorder, that tag might feel like a razor blade cutting into the back of your neck. And if I take away your words to communicate how much pain you're in, it creates anxiety, and the behavior may be peeling your clothes off to get the pain away from you. You can't peel your clothes off in the middle of school. It gets you in trouble. Adults can't peel their clothes off in the middle of stores, even if they feel that pain. It gets the police called, and it can lead to certainly negative interactions. So just keep in mind that sensory processing is a very real thing that a lot of people do struggle with. And there are great people who are making great sensory items that can help. And there's a lot of places to find them on the internet or in other places in some of our different places. My computer.
Oh, it looks like we might have lost him. So we'll hang tight for a couple of minutes. I think his
Can we
computer
ask
might have been restarting.
Can we ask questions?
Absolutely. I was just actually gonna, when he came to the end of that slide, we had a couple in the chat. So you can either put them in the chat, or when he comes back, you can come off mute. Either way is fine.
Okay. I just wanted to let you all know that Neal said his computer's restarting, so he'll be back shortly.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Boy, you should have seen the behavior that anxiety created. Woo!
It
Okay.
actually came at the perfect time, Neal. We had some chats kind of in
Oh,
in the chat, some questions. And so it was a good breaking point.
Okay. I haven't quite caught up yet, so hold on one second. Let me get my presentation back up so I can share my
Your
screen.
time.
It shook me. Okay, which screen do you see? My note screen, or do you see my presentation screen?
Your presentation.
Okay, cool. Sorry, everybody. Now you get to go through it again really fast. As I get to the right slide, there's my son's thought processes. Hi, we're back. Sorry about that. We love computers. Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for covering for me, Nikki. Nikki's like, I want to watch his presentation today and see how that goes. Boy, she's going to let me have it tomorrow in our meeting. We've talked about communication, we've talked about sensory processing, a little bit about social interaction. One thing I've learned from a long time interacting with adults on the autism spectrum is that eye contact is very, very overrated. I've been told by adults that I can look at you or I can listen to you. I can't do both at the same time. Eye contact can be very difficult or even painful for some people on the autism spectrum to make and maintain. So don't rely on eye contact. Just because someone's not looking at you does not mean they're not listening to you. So keep in mind that people, are able to hear you, what you're saying. And you can always say, did you hear what I said? Can you repeat back to me what I said? Let me know what I said, to verify that you're getting some feedback, that they can hear you. Even giving something to someone in writing and saying, here's what I just said, take a look at it, as another form of communication. Don't rely on body language to communicate. It's just as confusing as sarcasm, metaphors, idioms, and things like that. Use your language, keep your language easy to understand. That direct, literal language is the most effective way to communicate. I have two children. I have an older son named Jack, who's 21, not on the autism spectrum, but he's 21, and it's just a real joy sometimes. And Jack understands my body language. Jack interprets, he understands what the evil eye means. If we're out somewhere and he's doing something stupid that he shouldn't be doing, and he looks up at me and I'm going, Jack's gonna know, I better stop, and I better head back to where he is to find out what I'm doing and why I need to stop doing it. If I look at Max the same way, he'll just look back at me and go, what's wrong with your face? He wants to know. He's asking me, why are you looking at me like that? And I'll go, I told you to pick up your toys, I told you to turn off your computer, and I told you to come upstairs. And I'm relying on one facial expression to communicate three messages to a child who can't interpret facial expressions. That's not fair. There's going to be negative interactions. There's going to be misinterpretations. There's going to be misunderstandings. You got to use that language. It's the most effective way to communicate. When I say social cues, I'm talking about social skills rules. And the best way I've heard of a descriptor to what a social skills rule is it's an invisible rule that you don't know exists until you break it. And when you break it, you get the reaction that teaches you that that's a rule that you shouldn't change, you shouldn't break. So my mother told me a long time ago that it's really gross and disgusting to pick your nose in front of people. And if I hadn't learned that rule a long time ago, I could be on camera right now with my finger up my nose until somebody says, Neal, that's disgusting. You need to stop that. To explain that social skills rule to me and let me know that it exists. Keep in mind that just telling somebody a social skills rule once doesn't mean it stays with them forever. And sometimes it does take repeating over and over again to get that social skills rule to take. Sometimes it takes role playing. Sometimes it takes acting it out. Sometimes it takes social stories to get that social skills rule to stick. My son is a hugger. My son loves to hug. It's taken a very long time and a pandemic to break my son of the habit of wanting to run up and hug every person he sees. The COVID has been horrible, without question. But what it really has helped my son with is understanding personal space and distance. Saying stay 6 feet away to my son means nothing, because that implies that he understands that 12 inches is a foot and you add 6 of them together and that's the distance. But when he can look down on the ground and see dividing lines that show how far apart you're supposed to stay, that's a visual cue that helps him understand the rule, the social rule of standing 6 feet apart. But remembering social rules can be difficult in times of anxiety. He's a hugger. I'll give you an example. We were at Trader Joe's a couple of weeks ago, me and my wife and my son Max. And my wife ran into her college mentor from Towson University, who is 96 and 4'10" and weighs 97 pounds maybe. And my wife is so excited to see this woman, and she goes over and she gives her a hug like you give a little tiny old woman. And I look up, and Max is coming across Trader Joe's like Ray Lewis on a running play, arms out, and he is going to destroy this poor woman. And the look of fear on her face when she saw this large human, 5'6", 160 pounds, coming across was a very real look, because she had no idea who this child was. And I got to him before he got to her, and I pulled him out of the store, which created a whole big behavior. He was very upset because hugging is his favorite thing to do. And I said to him, Max, we talk about you can't hug everybody. You can't hug everyone you know. We had this conversation about a lot of things. He was going into high school live for the first time this year. And I said, you can't hug every girl in that high school. You're going to get your butt kicked by the girl, by her boyfriend. You're going to get sent to the principal. You can't hug. Why are you hugging, trying to hug people you don't know? And his answer was, well, mom knows her. To him, mom knowing somebody invalidated all the rules and social things we talked about. Mom hugged somebody when you're not supposed to be hugging. So he figured he had the green light. And he came in very quickly for a hug. If he had come up to hug any lady, he doesn't really hug the men very much. But if he goes up and hugs a woman, he's going to wrap his arms around you and he's going to bury his head in the middle of your chest. He's 5'6" and 160 pounds. You can't hug people that way. You're too big. They don't know who you are. That's an inappropriate hug to give somebody at your age and size for a stranger. But when Max was a little tiny thing, a little cute, pudgy, cherubic little kid, and he would say to women, can I have a hug? No one ever said no. And when he hugged them, he would put his arms around them and he'd bury his head in their chest. And not one woman ever said, that's inappropriate. Don't you dare hug me that way. Go away. Max doesn't understand the difference between Max and Max. There's a very big difference in my son, but he still feels like that little kid, but that body says there's different rules for you now. You can't interact the same way as you did when you were little. The same behaviors are not acceptable. Excuse me. The social skills rules change the bigger you get and the older you get. But it's hard to remember all of them, especially in times of anxiety. Personal space is a big issue, especially for a 17-year-old going through puberty. So I know that Nikki's got a 17-year-old too, and it's a wild ride, I'll tell you. So that's some of the social interaction piece that we have. It's a myth that people with autism don't feel the same range of emotions, oftentimes a higher sense of empathy in the autism community. You may get responses to anxiety-inducing situations that you consider inappropriate, laughter, or things like that. Think of the situation, give time to process, and maybe you'll get a different reaction after that first one. I'll give you one very quick example because we are running up on time a little bit, was that when my porch was frozen over a couple of winters ago, and I walked outside, my boys went down the steps in front of me, and I went down behind them, and I hit the ice, and I went up in the air and landed with my leg tucked underneath me behind me, made a horrendous noise. And my wife and my older son reacted the way you would seeing a loved one bite it the way I did. Oh my God, are you okay? Should we call 911? Did you break your leg? What can we do? And we look over at Max, and Max is sitting there, head back, teeth showing, cracking up laughing. Funniest thing he'd ever seen. And my wife, who has a couple of different letters after her last name for studying autism and special education, turned on this boy and really was upset with, oh, you're in big trouble. You're laughing at daddy. You're going to be in timeout. I don't like what you're doing. But they get me up. They get me in. A minute and a half later, Max comes in the door. He's not laughing anymore. He's got tears rolling down his face from crying, not laughing. And he's bringing me heating pads and ice packs and vitamin C pills and Band-Aids and orange juice, whatever he can first aid wise to try and help me. It took him longer to process what he'd seen. And when he finally caught up to him, he realized it was serious. But to be fair, people falling down is funny. He watches the Three Stooges. He watches America's Funniest Home Videos. He watches Ridiculousness. All of that is people falling down or injuring themselves at Laugh Track. So he reacted the way he normally would seeing someone fall on TV, and then realized it was dad and it was actually a much more serious situation. I look at behavior as communication. Rule out pain if you're seeing behavior that's new. Inability to communicate pain often does lead to behavior because pain creates anxiety. I don't like referring to things as obsessions. I think that's a pretty negative word. I like looking at them as passions. And I think understanding somebody's passions is a really good tool to help communicate and de-escalate. If you meet Max on the street and you see he's wearing his Ravens t-shirt with a Mario Brothers bag of toys and a Pokemon bag of toys, there's 3 passions of his that you can use to talk to him, to help him de-escalate if he's wound up, to help him communicate and get that started. He may not answer your questions about what his name and address is, I tell officers, but if you say to him, oh, who's your favorite water type Pokemon? He'll go off and talk to you for 15 minutes about it. And while he's talking to you, he's de-escalating and his ability to communicate will go up. Elopement and wandering is a major issue in the autism community. 71% of deaths related to wandering are caused by drowning. There's a major attraction to water in the autism community, whether it's the sight, the sound, the smell, the feel. Nobody really knows what it is. Time of the year doesn't matter. Temperature of the water doesn't matter. It is a major concern in the autism community. Almost 50% of children with autism will elope at some point in time. Elopement is leaving a safe situation, not running away from a burning building or a kidnapping. It's leaving a safe situation for any variety of reasons, a want, a need, a panic, anxiety. Mom said we were going to get a milkshake. She's not ready to leave, but I am, and out the door I go. Happened in Hartford County a few weeks ago. A little 8-year-old. Mom had told him they were going to go to Wawa and get milkshakes. She wasn't ready to go, and he was. And he walked out in his pajamas and no shoes and walked 1.5 miles to a Wawa to get the milkshake he wanted. Wasn't able to communicate name or phone number. It is a major problem in the autism community. Pathfindersforautism.org has a lot of safety resources, safety webinars recorded, information where you can find ID bracelets, safety tattoos, local forms to fill out so local dispatch can know your child, places to find swim lessons on our provider directory. Reach out to us, reach out to me, or reach out to Nikki, and we can get you the information and resources you need safety-wise. Be glad to share it with you. Some helpful tools that maybe you haven't thought of, maybe you use, maybe you've had good results with them. My kid is a kid who loves schedules. My wife and I call it checklisting. We checklist everything for Max. Every day we go out, he knows exactly what our plan is for the day. My one pro tip for you, if you're going to do scheduling for your child, leave gaps in time so you can add things as you need them. Because trying to fit something in where there's no time gap might create a little bit of anxiety for some. So we always try and build some gaps in so we can add things to the schedule if we need to. I showed you what picture exchange cards are earlier. Feel free to use them look them up on Google. You can find them on Pinterest and other places like that. Social stories, visual stories, whether with pictures or with words that explain a situation, a new situation you might be going into. I've seen some great social stories out there. Another thing you could certainly Google, Carol Gray is the woman who created them. There's a whole variety of them if you Google social stories, library, doctor's office, whatever, and you can find them that you can use to, before my son goes to the dentist's office, we go over the social story. We're going to walk in here. We're going to sit down in the waiting room here. We're going to sit in the chair here. This is what the dentist looks like. They're going to clean your teeth. They're going to polish your teeth. They're going to take an x-ray. Then we're going to leave. And we read it leading up to the dentist office. So it helps reduce some of the anxiety he might feel. I love fidgets. I always have a fidget with me when I'm presenting. I like to squeeze a fidget while I'm talking. It helps reduce my anxiety. I was squeezing the heck out of it, waiting for my computer to come back up. I can tell you that. So I'm a big fan of fidgets to help reduce anxiety and help de-escalate sometimes. It's a great app called ChoiceWorks. Helps to schedule your day, helps to let a person identify how they're feeling, helps to let them pick out an activity they want to do. It can be done with actual photographs that can be put in. You can customize a nighttime schedule that can help people. There must be a number of different apps like this. This is one that we found that we all kind of liked. I love time timers. Time timers are great for my son. I see Yvette nodding, she gets it. You know why my son likes them? Because it shows how much time has elapsed and how much time he has left. It's a very clear picture of when the transition is coming to the next activity. I can't go downstairs at 10 o'clock at night, grab my son's electronics, turn them off, walk away and say, let's go, we're going upstairs. there's going to be some real behavior if I try and end that preferred activity very quickly with no warning. So what I like to do with my son is use a time timer. And I say, Max, click, you got 10 minutes. And let it run so he can see it where he is in his computer room. And then I pop back in, Max, you got 5 minutes. Max, you got 2 minutes. Max, you got 1 minute. And I give him warnings that the transition is coming so that when the 10 minutes is up, does it work every time? No, he's 17. He's a teenager, but he knows it's coming. And the transitions have been much smoother using the timers and the warnings that we give him as opposed to ending it abruptly. That helps with transition. Transition can be a real challenge for some. I hope you remember everything I said and not the fact that my computer kicked me off in the middle. Some of the things we went over today, 20-second rule, give people time to process and think. Keep that language direct and simple. Sit down, not take your seat. Use the language that can't be misinterpreted. My up, down, up arrows, I think is if you can reduce someone's anxiety, try and think of what creates anxiety for your child or your student or for yourself. How can you reduce the things that create anxiety so you can keep the behavior down? Present information more than one way. I know for Max, who is verbal, very verbal sometimes too verbal, for him, when he's really having a tough time communicating, I'll type out a message on my phone and just show it to him. It slows him down. It makes a different part of his brain work so he can communicate. It might slow it down a little bit for him and make communication a little easier. Minimize sensory distractions when you can. Remember, behavior is communication. And most importantly, I think it's to be flexible. I think that the autism population, some individuals aren't the most flexible. So finding other ways to do things, other ways to communicate, other ways to get tasks done, if and then, reward charts, whatever it can be to try and get what you want in the most harmonious relationship you have. Presume intellect is really one of the most important things I can tell you. Treat adults like adults, treat teenagers like teenagers. If you have to come down and meet somebody where they are, you can. But I think you should start off on the level where they are. I know that one of the doctors we trained, one of the moms who was helping us train one of the doctors, she had a 15-year-old son, and she said that when her son was in the hospital, the staff would come in, wouldn't say hello, wouldn't interact with him in any way because he was nonverbal, would come in, grab him, do blood pressure, take blood, do whatever, and leave, and never introduced themselves, never said hello, never said how you doing, because they didn't presume intellect. They figured there's no way we could communicate with this child. And what she said to them was, if you had any other 15-year-old patient, you wouldn't be doing this with them. You'd be engaging in conversation and being more communicative, and that's what he needs. So we want everyone to presume intellect. I think that's really important. That's all of my contact information. You all are welcome to reach out to me anytime. Adam, you're always welcome to reach out and call us. We don't do any kind of one-on-one work sessions, but I mean, there are people here in the help center, whether it's Nikki who answers the phone or myself, and we'd be glad to talk to you and talk over what you want to talk about. We don't do any kind of one-on-one coaching counseling, but we do have the help center line that you can always reach out to us on that, and we'd be more than happy to discuss it with you. Not a problem. If anybody has any other questions, welcome to turn your mics or your cameras on to ask anything you want. I lost all the chat when my computer crashed. I know, Yvette, you asked if my son advocates for himself. My son does advocate for himself. For us, he absolutely does. He's a little bit better about telling us what he wants as long as his anxiety hasn't started to go up too high. He's able to advocate for himself to a point. If it gets too much, all of that goes away. He does advocate for himself in school, but we found that some of his teachers don't take very kindly to it. And he's not advocating rudely. I mean, he has, but he'll say to a teacher, "You're talking too much. You need to slow down." And they don't like that. They think he's being disrespectful. And he's really, I think, advocating very well for himself, saying, "You're overwhelming me with your words." Now, he'll also say, "You're giving me a headache," which might be true, but it doesn't get received very well. But yeah, he advocates, he can let us know what he wants and what he needs and things like that. As long as the anxiety is manageable, when things go over a certain point, he doesn't advocate for himself very well, and it goes right to behavior. And we have to sort of figure out what created this anxiety that's built up, that comes up. A lot of that we see when he gets home from school, it's stuff he's been holding in all day. The anxiety, the frustration, stuff like that builds up that he holds in because he doesn't want to melt down in front of everybody at school. And sometimes he'll come home and let that go. And it's interesting because he'll come to me here at the office off the bus, and he sits in our office, and he sits and he plays quietly on his computer, and he's fine. And we leave thinking everything's okay. And sometimes I'll get in the car and it's just like kaboom. And it's everything he's been holding in, because he doesn't want to have a meltdown here at my office. Even though if he was going to melt down anywhere, this place would be the most accepting place I can imagine other than my home, because it's a lot of other parents of kids on the spectrum. But yeah, he does advocate sometimes in some ways. If anybody else has any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, I wish you all a very good night. Thank you so much for your patience. And I look forward to talking to all of you again.
Mr. Neal, thank you so much. I think everybody would agree that this has been an outstanding presentation, and your transparency is greatly appreciated. Ms. Tiffany did ask to a little bit more information about examples of the overstimulation piece. Maybe she would like to come off mic and express her question herself.
Yeah, I asked that question because this is really honest. My son, he plays with himself, and he'll play with himself no matter, he's been around two of his favorite cousins, and he'll play with himself there. And I told him he can play with himself, but he got to do that when nobody else is around and he's in his own room, or when he's in the tub, he can do it then when it's only him in the tub and nobody else. But because I don't want to tell him he can't do that.
How old is your son?
Over and under stimulate. He's 6.
Okay. First of all, I think that's pretty neurotypical. I think 6-year-olds are sort of exploring and finding themselves at that age. And I think there are social stories out there. If you want to email me or Nikki, we can find you some social stories that talk about that exact situation, and laying out very clear ground rules. And maybe it's like signs you put around the house where it's like a circle with a red mark. You can't do that here. You can't do that here. You can't do that here. There are private areas where you go do that. And maybe you saying it he's not processing that, but maybe the visual of the sign might be what he needs to get. Okay, I can't do that here. I need to go there. Maybe before the cousins come over, before you go over their house, you have that. You read a social story. You have a conversation. Listen, I understand you want to do that. There's only certain places you can do that. Let's talk about that. Using more than one way to communicate your expectations might be helpful. I don't know for sure. I know that Trisha's son also had a similar thing as he was going through puberty, and she used a lot of signs in her house to indicate private areas and public areas so that he knew where it was okay to do it and where it wasn't okay. I like the message you're sending. It's okay to do it, but there's only certain places you can, and maybe having a little sign in the rooms where it's okay to do it might be a visual cue that he knows where he should be and where he shouldn't be. Maybe try something like that.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Do I have any suggestions for bathroom anxiety?
Yes.
Bathroom, we do have, so is it bathroom anxiety of like you're trying to do potty training, or bathroom anxiety where they won't use the toilet? I mean, they're afraid to, or so I'm thinking two different things here. For potty training, it can be a behavior thing, but also going to the bathroom is extremely sensory intense for everybody, especially moving your bowels, because it's sometimes uncomfortable. It can smell, it has sound, the toilet is noisy, the flushing of the toilet. So I'm not the expert on that kind of stuff. I would reach out in the school system to maybe an OT who might have some information on that, or even a school psychologist who might. But if it's potty training, I have some great articles and webinars on potty training I would love to share. Not using the bathroom all day at school. Yeah, I've heard that. And I think that is a lot of, you're afraid for people to walk in. It's very noisy. It's a private thing that you have to do in public. That can be, can he go to the nurse's office to use the bathroom? Is that something you can get built into an IEP? Can you get that? Can you call a meeting to say, what can we do to help with that? Because it's a health issue at that point if he's not using the toilet enough. So is that something you can ask for help with from the professionals that you're working with in your school system? And maybe some of our PG County special ed people would have an idea of what kind of accommodations could be made in that situation. My son doesn't use the public bathrooms in school. He goes to the nurse's office because he's never alone in a bathroom because I don't know how he's going to act. So we always have him using the nurse's bathroom, and it's never really been much of an issue for us. So maybe ask a teacher, or maybe ask if he can use a nurse's office or a private bathroom. I don't know if that helps. I hope it does.
Depending upon the age, I would recommend talking to the school team, the IEP team, about a bathroom schedule, because this could turn into a health concern.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He's in kindergarten. Yeah, I mean, going to the bathroom is scary enough. You know, and that little, yeah, but I think if you can find some accommodations, or even getting that schedule going where he can go in a private time, maybe when not everybody's there yet or something like that, or finding that private bathroom can be very helpful. But I would reach out to a team and say to the team, this is what I'm worried about, and take that to the team and let them work on coming up with some good accommodations that might be able to work. Good luck. I hope it works. Nicole, I see you have your hand up. It just went away. Or was that you, Nicole, with her question?
I'm sorry, I did it on accident, but thank
That's
you for all
okay.
the great information.
I do that all the time in Zoom meetings. My hand is up and I had no idea how I'd even put it there. Anybody else have anything?
We are over time, but once again, Mr. Lichter, this has been outstanding. Thank you for letting us record it. To our participants, Marcy will upload it to our YouTube page. Probably it'll take a couple of weeks because we have to do the editing. And if you have any further questions, Mr. Lichter has agreed for you to reach out to him by email, or you can reach out to the Family Support Center to ask us, and we can get messages to him as well. We just want to remind you that we've had a wonderful conference series, and we have more great sessions that you can sign up for as well. I was negligent and did not get the link, but if you don't have the link to register for sessions, just reach out to us. And Mr. Lichter put his email and phone number in the chat. So thank you, thank you, thank you again. This has been outstanding. And any participant who wants to say one last word, please feel free.
It's my pleasure.